Be forewarned. If you are easily upset or don't have the stomach for controversy, do not listen to this program.
So actually, I actually think that calling Washington, D.C. a swamp is an insult to swamps. Washington is not a swamp. I think a better metaphor would be cesspool.
I can hear him say,
Welcome to The Decline and Fall of America, starring Jim Greenfield, formerly known as The Jim Greenfield Show, starring Jim Greenfield. And I've got with me my sidekick and producer, Stuart Rice, formerly known as Stuart White. And the quote of the day...
Welcome back, by the way, Jim.
Thank you, Stuart. You too. The quote of the day, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel. Hegel.
Jim.
Yes.
Who is William...
Friedrich
William...
Hegel.
Hegel.
Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel is the guy who said, we learn from history that we do not learn from history. And I wanted to start today by disclosing the Decline and Fall of America privacy policy for our listeners. And our privacy policy is, you have no privacy.
Okay,
that's
a big selling point, I think, for a lot of people.
Just wanted to be upfront about that. Unlike Facebook and Google, we don't make any bones about it. You have no privacy. And before I launch into our topics, I wanted to mention, Stuart, that I was thinking about something that you've said to me on a number of occasions, to the effect that you're not interested in politics.
Yeah, I mean, a little-known fact.
Which is a kind of an odd thing for somebody who's like a sidekick on a political podcast.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of a softball for you, because I'm seen as the liberal guy, and I don't know anything about politics, which makes it much easier to beat me in any of the competition.
In debate.
Debates.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know those word competitions that people have?
What, you mean debates?
Debates, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. So I was thinking about it, and I was thinking that, a lot of people aren't interested in politics. And I think that not being interested in politics is a luxury that we can afford in good times. But I think if you go to Iraq or Yemen or Syria or Venezuela or Afghanistan, you'll find that everybody's interested in politics. And
Absolutely.
The reason is because your life depends on it. And so...
Yeah, there's a certain level of complacency here.
Yeah, of course. So you can afford to not be interested in politics as long as your country's not engaged in a civil war. At that point it becomes a little difficult. Anyway, that's not what I really wanted to talk about. But you told me we should always start with a little banter.
Yes, way to segue right into the banter.
Well, actually, before we go into the banter, I'll just mention some of the topics that I'd like to talk about. First of all, main thing is, I want to talk about how all of the Trump supporters believe that Donald Trump is draining the swamp. And no disrespect intended to Donald Trump, but he's not draining the swamp. Nobody's draining the swamp. Nobody's going to drain the swamp. The swamp cannot be drained. And we'll get to that. Yes.
Okay, we will get to that, because I have a feeling like we wouldn't really necessarily want the swamp completely drained. I think that's a bad idea. Yeah.
Why is that?
Because there are systems in place, and there are people that are not necessarily elected officials that probably do a pretty decent job in their positions.
You mean the bureaucrats?
Mm-mm. No, I mean people that are appointed into their jobs, or that actually do a decent job. I think just by taking a sledgehammer to a nail is not a good idea.
Damn it! I forgot when I started the show. You see, I'm a little rusty. We haven't recorded for quite a while.
It's been a while, yeah.
And I forgot to say when I started the segment, I forgot to say, this is Jim Greenfield, the smartest guy I know.
We can edit that in post. I can move that to the front.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to. I could.
You could. A lot of things you could do.
All sorts of things.
You could get famous by running onto the White House lawn naked. But it's not something you would do. Maybe you would. So, anyway, what did you say?
I don't like the idea of
I was thinking about the fact that I'd forgotten to introduce myself
Your
as the smartest guy I know.
You forgot my brilliance.
So you said something about...
I'm not a fan of taking a sledgehammer to a nail. I think that taking like one... It's not even a strategy, it's just a statement.
And taking a sledgehammer to the swamp, that's a metaphor that totally doesn't work.
Not at all.
No. You can't take a sledgehammer to the swamp. So actually, I actually think that calling Washington, D.C. a swamp is an insult to swamps. Mm-hmm. Washington is not a swamp. I think a better metaphor would be cesspool. Because I don't have a problem with a swamp. I could, I wouldn't mind taking a boat trip through a swamp. I mean, there'd be mosquitoes, but it's just filled with corruption, graft, muck, filth, and moral decrepitude.
Is that a word?
No. What is the word? Sounds like
depravity, or
it's depravity, degeneracy. But there's a word, but I'm missing it.
Yeah.
It sounds sort of like decrepitude.
Yeah, I like it. It sounds good. I think I might start using decrepitude.
I know that when we're done the broadcast, I'm going to remember the word. Well, anyway, it's not pulchritude. You know what pulchritude?
Pulchritude?
That's beauty.
No,
I think pulchritude is
beauty.
beauty.
My God, pulchritude.
Yeah.
That's the
vocab
word of the week.
But anyway, the reason I say that Trump hasn't drained the swamp is because people who think that Trump is draining the swamp don't understand what the swamp is. I mean, Trump may actually come down and prosecute. Actually, Attorney General William Barr may actually prosecute a handful of corrupt, high-level government officials from the Obama administration. They may actually get some of these people, but that's not draining the swamp. That's taking one drop of water out of a swamp that has trillions of gallons of water. Mm-hmm. So, I actually think that the Trump administration really didn't start until February 14th, 2019. That's the day that Donald Trump really became president. Now, do you know what happened on February 14th, 2019?
No. What
I didn't
happened?
think you would. I had to look it up myself.
All the way back in February.
February of this year. Yeah, that's
On
when Trump.
Valentine's
That's when
Day.
Trump really became president. Because you know what happened on February 14th?
What?
William Barr became Attorney General of the United States, and that was it. Because before that, he had his own Justice Department trying to destroy him under the leadership of acting Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, but de facto acting Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein. Rosenstein, by the way, I'm sort of a digression, but Rosenstein, by the way, switched sides. He was like the mastermind of the conspiracy to take Trump down post-election. He was the mastermind, and he switched sides because this guy's a genius. I mean, Rosenstein is the smartest guy in Washington.
Really?
And he saw the handwriting on the wall, and he switched sides, and he went over to the Trump Barr side of the fight, right? Because now that Barr's in power, Trump's going to win, and so he flip-flopped. He switched over. Very smart guy, and a master strategist, and I think the best political chess player in Washington.
Interesting. What do you think his end game is?
I don't know, but I don't. He just resigned, but I don't think we've heard the end. The end
Okay.
of him. Yeah. So, anyway, I'm like totally disorganized today, so I'm going to be like all over the place. But here's the point. I'm not going to go into the whole conspiracy against Trump because most people who are listening to this have heard it all over the place. The best place to go.
They believe it for whatever reason, anyways.
Well, the best place to get information about it has been Sean Hannity. Sean Hannity's had Sarah Carter, the reporter, investigative reporter, and Greg Jarrett, attorney, who wrote a book about it, and he goes into it in depth and detail every night. So I'm not going to do that. But basically, the conspiracy to overthrow the 2016 election involved Andrew McCabe, who was the deputy director of the FBI, Peter Strzok, and Lisa Page. Peter Strzok, who was he was the head of the FBI's counterterrorism unit. Lisa Page, who was the attorney to, I think she was counsel to the director of the FBI, or deputy director, one or the other. And then, of course, everybody knows Strzok and Page were famous lovers. You'll go down history along with Romeo and Juliet, and Napoleon and what's her name? Who's Napoleon's wife? Come on, Stuart.
I don't. I'm not into celebrity news.
Celebrity. It wasn't celebrity. It was history. It'll come to me. You can look it up. But anyway, Strzok and Page. What?
Not the rapper.
No.
Just kidding. There's no rapper named Napoleon.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Stuart, for introducing the levity there. And then, of course, FBI Director Jim Comey, John Brennan, head of the CIA, James Clapper, the Director of National Security. I mean, these are the top people. Attorney General Loretta Lynch was almost certainly involved in this. Bruce Orr, another high-ranking attorney, Justice Department official, and then, as I say, Rod Rosenstein. He didn't start it. I don't think he was involved at the beginning, but he kind of took it over. And this Rosenstein, I talked about this before. And by the way, Stuart, let the record show. You may remember, I was talking about this before anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, Sean Hannity was doing some stuff, but I think I was the first one. And if you go back, and I don't remember when it was one of my podcasts from a year and a half ago, where I connected the dots. I hate that expression, but I connected the dots, and actually concluded that it was a conspiracy to conduct a coup against the President of the United States. Now, a lot of conservative pundits now are saying that, right. And even some conservative politicians are saying that.
And
that's what that's what Attorney General Barr is now investigating.
Sure, I'll go back and I'll put that in the show notes.
Okay.
That episode.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but the point is that I'm not going into that. But what I am going to do is explain why getting rid of those people is not draining the swamp, because the swamp is so much bigger than that. And then we'll get into the fact that the Democrats are now constantly saying that this is a constitutional crisis. And what's the constitutional crisis? It's the fact that Attorney General William Barr won't obey an illegal command from Congress, which doesn't have the authority to command him because it's a separate and equal branch of government anyway. So they think that's a constitutional crisis. Or at least they say they think it's a constitutional crisis.
And it's not.
There is a constitutional crisis, but that's not it. And I'll talk about what the real constitutional crisis is. Okay, so now, first of all, draining the swamp. And like I said, I would rather call it draining the cesspool or cleaning out the cesspool. Because Washington, D.C. has evolved into this massive center of corruption. And I need to expand my lexicon.
I'll get you a subscription to
Reader's Digest. That's the kind of car I drive.
The lexicon, yeah.
So
service on those things are so expensive.
I know, you can't get parts. So why can't Trump drain the swamp? Why is that not possible? First of all, with all due respect, I mean, Trump is really not a bad president. He's actually turning out to be a surprisingly good president. But he's not even trying to drain the swamp. And if he did try, he would fail. There'd probably be a coup against him. Okay, so there's a coup against him anyway. But everybody would get, all the Republicans would get into the coup also.
Yeah.
If Trump really tried to drain the swamp. So what is that? The swamp, the cesspool. What is it? Well, it's not a handful of conspirators trying to overthrow an election. That is an effect of the swamp. That's a symptom of the swamp. That wouldn't be possible if it weren't for the swamp. And what is the swamp? Okay, I keep coming back to this term swamp. What is the cesspool? The cesspool is that beginning more than 100 years ago, a process began, starting more than 100 years, a process began to overthrow the Constitution of the United States. And that process has been largely successful. Everybody thinks that we're living in a constitutional republic, but only vestiges of the original constitutional plan still exist. To a large extent, the original constitutional plan of government that was created in Philadelphia in 1787.
The year you were born.
No. As I've said before, the Founding Fathers met in Philadelphia in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention, not knowing that I was going to be born there 160 years later.
I see, okay.
And they called it the Miracle in Philadelphia. The Constitution, that is, not my birth. You know, to me, that's kind of a miracle.
It's a miracle
also.
for you.
You know, every day I say, how did I get here? What am I doing here? It's a miracle. But they created a plan of limited government. That was the essence. That was the essence of the constitutional plan. And I've mentioned this before. If you go back and you read the Federalist Papers, the Federalist Papers were written in 1787, mostly by James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. And they were an attempt to persuade the people living in the 13 states, because it wasn't a United States yet. They were living in the 13 states. They were trying to persuade those people who were very suspicious of government power, having just recently fought a revolution against what they perceived as a tyrannical government power, although parenthetically, the government of King George was not nearly as oppressive and tyrannical as the government we live under today.
Interesting.
You know, which is kind of ironic. But anyway, they having come through a revolution to fight off the yoke of government power and oppression and bureaucracy, they were very suspicious of the idea of a centralized government in Washington. And so Hamilton and Madison...
And just to emphasize this, we had gone to war.
Yeah.
For that exact thing. That was...
Right.
That was the war that was fought at that time.
That's right.
Yes.
Over high taxes and government regulation. I mean, it says in the Declaration of Independence.
What?
I'm going to get it. I'm going to give it to you.
Okay.
Verbatim.
All right.
Here it is.
Okay.
This is from the Declaration of Independence about King George. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Now, if that doesn't describe our government today, 100 times worse than the government of King George, that those people were fighting a revolution because they found it so oppressive. Especially anybody who's in small business today, anybody who's in business of any kind, knows that that's exactly what that government bureaucracy does, both at the federal level and at the state and local level. They send out swarms of officers to harass us and eat out our substance. And I can tell you this, as a small business man for how many years now? More than 40 years. I am constantly fighting battles against government bureaucrats who think it's their job to tell me how to blow my nose and how to run my business and how to use my property. And that's why 95% of small business people are either call themselves conservative or libertarian. Don't like the government. The government is a huge problem for us, right? It's the problem, it's the biggest problem. So, anyway, the plan of government was supposed to be limited. And if you read the Federalist Papers, written, as I say, by Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, who were two of the most important, probably the two most important figures at the Constitutional Convention.
And one of them is a big Broadway star.
And I don't mean that they were more important than George Washington or Ben Franklin, but they were more important in terms of their role in drafting the Constitution. Yeah. Hamilton and Madison were like two of the key players in drafting the Constitution. They were both brilliant. And they wrote the Federalist Papers, which basically were intended to persuade the people of the 13 states that the new Constitution was not a threat to their liberty, because it was a plan of limited government, that the government was only going to have certain limited powers that were clearly defined and delegated. And if you read through the Federalist Paper, that's the main thrust of their argument. Don't worry, we're creating centralized power for mutual defense, and to make sure that we don't have restraints on trade like tariffs between the states, so that we can have free trade among the states. But otherwise, Hamilton actually said the role of the central government is going to be limited. It will have a few powers that are clearly defined, and it doesn't have any power except what's granted to it in the Constitution. And in case anybody had any doubt about this, and again, I've talked about this before, they passed the 10th Amendment, was part of the Bill of Rights, and it said, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. The powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So in other words, it was making it very explicit that the federal government only had those powers that are clearly defined and explicitly delegated to the federal government. And if you look through Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, that's where it lists the powers that are granted to Congress, which is the lawmaking body. And they're astonishing. If you read through it, it's only a few pages. Anybody can read it. If you read through it, it's pretty clear that, what are their powers? Okay, here are the powers of Congress. I'm going to mention the main ones granted under Article 1, Section 8. They have the power to lay and collect taxes. They have the power to borrow money, to regulate commerce among the several states and with foreign nations. And they have the power to create laws on bankruptcy. The power to coin money. Doesn't say print, by the way. It says coin.
Right.
It definitely doesn't say create digital currency.
What about Bitcoin?
Doesn't say anything about Bitcoin. It says they have the power to provide for the punishment of counterfeiting, to create post offices, and patents and copyrights, and punish pirates, and declare war, and to raise armies and a navy. They didn't say anything about an air force.
Well, yeah, okay.
And for those of you who didn't know it, the airplane hadn't been invented yet.
Correct.
Okay. So, those are the powers. That's it. Now, can anybody please tell me, where does it say that the government has the power? For example, this is one tiny example. Does the federal government have the power to create a mandatory retirement system that everyone is forced to participate in, whether they want to or not? That's called Social Security.
Right.
Does it grant the federal government the power to create a Social Security system? I defy anybody to find that in the Constitution. And if you do, call the show. And Stuart knows the number.
I do. And it is going to be entered in right now.
Okay. We'll edit that in. I'll bet we forget to edit it in.
No, probably.
So
here, I'll actually make it there. Now I'll remember.
So that's one example of a totally unauthorized government program. It's unconstitutional. It's illegal. Just don't hold your breath waiting for the Supreme Court to declare Social Security unconstitutional, because that's not going to happen.
No.
Okay. What about Medicare? There's nothing. How about Medicaid? How about Obamacare? How about anything? Anything. The word medical care, the words medical care, health care, do not appear in the United States Constitution. So again, I defy anybody to find a provision of the Constitution that authorizes the federal government to provide medical care for people. Now, I can go on and on about this. How about food stamps? How about housing subsidies? How about, what else? What else do they give? Cash assistance. Okay, now you think, oh, Greenfield, you're just picking on poor people. You don't want the government helping old people and poor people out. Okay, how about bank subsidies? Where in the Constitution does it say that the government can bail out failed banks? How about the Federal Reserve? Where in the Constitution does it say that the federal government, can create its own bank that controls all the other banks? Not in there. How about the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, where the federal government purportedly insures bank deposits for banks across the country? Not in there. How about a Securities and Exchange Commission giving the government regulatory power over the stock market? Nope, not in the Constitution. How about a Department of Health and Human Services? Nope. Department of Housing and Urban Development? No. Department of Transportation? No. Agriculture Department? No. Do you think we actually need an Agriculture Department? What exactly does the Agriculture Department do? Does the Agriculture Department help our farmers to be better farmers? I think that our farmers, American farmers, need the Agriculture Department to help them become better farmers about as much as LeBron James would need a Department of Basketball to help him become a better basketball player. Our farmers are the greatest, the best in the world. I mean, they produce an abundance of food beyond our needs, and they're only 1% of the population. They produce enough food to feed the other 99% of us.
It is incredible.
Plus millions of other people around the world. And is that because we have an agriculture department? A labor department? What's that? What do we need a labor department for? People need a department of labor in order to labor? How about a commerce department? What are they? They're the ones who make the crooked deals with other countries to get benefits for our large companies and, to give them advantages over small companies? The point is that the federal government, most of what the federal government does is unconstitutional. You cannot find in the Constitution any authority for most of what they're doing. Now, personally, what I would like to see would be, this isn't going to happen, I'd like to see a constitutional amendment that requires Congress, whenever they pass a law, to cite what provision of the Constitution gives them the authority to pass that law. Under what power do they have? Now, what does this have to do with the coup attempt against Donald Trump, which at this point looks like it's been unsuccessful? The Mueller report was part of the coup attempt. Sure. Okay. Well, what does that have to do with it? Well, the fact is that this is an outgrowth of this humongous, unconstitutional, oppressive government bureaucracy that has been created in Washington over the last 106 years. It all started in 1913. 1913 is the year I trace it to. In 1913, what happened in 1913? Two major reforms occurred. The Federal Reserve System was created, and the 16th Amendment creating the income tax was passed. And these two reforms dramatically expanded the power of the federal government. And the bureaucracy that's grown up since then has been enabled by those two changes. That's what enables the government to basically create and raise unlimited amounts of money. Before that, the government couldn't grow like this because they didn't have enough money. They didn't have the power to tax. They had tariffs. They had a very low tariff. That was the only tax the federal government had, a 3% tariff. Now Trump's just put 25% on the Chinese. Well, they had a 3% tariff on all goods coming to the U.S., and that was all they had. That was the only money that federal government had. So they didn't have money to create the huge bureaucracy. By the way, for liberals, you'll be happy to hear that they also didn't have the money to maintain a huge Defense Department. And if you look back over the historical record, you'll notice that between 1787 or 1789 was when our republic actually started. Between 1789 and 1913, the U.S. was involved in foreign wars for a total of 4 years. Out of that 124-year period, we were involved in foreign wars for 4 years. Since 1913, we've been involved in foreign wars. I don't know the exact, I'd have to think it through to figure out the exact number, but probably 60% of the time, because we can afford to.
Right.
You only got 3% tariff, gets kind of pricey, right? So, but anyway, the main point is this: we have this. The federal government employs millions of bureaucrats to harass our people and eat out our substance. And just for give you a couple examples, the number of IRS employees, 80,000. Total Treasury Department, 87,000. The number of FBI employees, 35,000. Now, what do they do? Do you know we didn't have an FBI until 1908, right?
Right.
So somehow our republic managed to survive from 1789 to 1908, that's 119 years, without an FBI. Now, if you were to say to people today, well, maybe we should abolish the FBI, nobody would agree with you.
No.
They'd be aghast. What? Are you kidding? How could we function without an FBI? Who would investigate all the crimes?
Who would look for the aliens?
Yeah. Well, no, the Homeland Security Department does that. That's a whole other...
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. They'd say, well, we can't function without an FBI, but we did. You know, we did fine. We had something then that people are unfamiliar with today, back in those days. It's called freedom. Now, so you got 35,000 FBI agents. The Attorney General's office or Department of Justice has a total, as of 2012, I couldn't get a more recent figure, I don't know why, but as of 2012, the DOJ had 113,543 employees. What the hell do they do? What do they do? You've got 93 U.S. attorneys and then an army of other lawyers working under them. So you got thousands and thousands of attorneys working for the federal government prosecuting people.
Yeah.
For what? They don't prosecute for murder and robbery.
No.
Right?
No, we
ordinarily.
have a whole different
Ordinarily,
thing.
unless it's terrorism or
Right.
something interstate. That's usually done by the state and local government. Well, what are they investigating people for? What's the FBI investigating people for? And what are the U.S. attorneys prosecuting people for? And it's largely white-collar crimes that didn't used to be crimes, like securities fraud or insider trading, or think about some of the famous people who've gotten their tit caught in that ringer in recent years. And I'll just give you a couple examples. Michael Cohen. Now, I'm no fan of Michael Cohen. Well, what did they get him for? Nobody knows. He said, "Oh yeah, he was Trump's fixer. He was a crooked lawyer. He was a crooked lawyer."
Yeah.
Okay, but what did they get him for? Tax evasion and bank fraud. What's bank fraud? Well, I don't know in his specific case, but I think bank fraud generally means if you apply for a loan and you overstate your assets or your income, bank fraud. Right? Well, who the hell doesn't do that?
Right.
You're trying to get a loan. I think the banks, I think they're pretty good at protecting themselves. I don't think we need to be putting people in prison for, defrauding a bank by overstating their assets. Insider trading. You know what insider trading is? They go after a lot of people for insider trading.
Yeah.
Insider trading means your brother-in-law tells you that the company he works for is about to bring in a new product to the market. You go and buy the company's stock based on that. Next thing you know, there's men in black at your door, and probably you're not actually going to go to prison for the insider trading. You're going to go to prison for lying to these SOBs. Ask Martha Stewart.
Right.
They were investigating Martha Stewart for insider trading, but they actually prosecuted and convicted her for lying to FBI agents. Well, they lie all the time. I mean, James Comey famously is like one of the most prominent liars in Washington. So he can lie to us. But you lie to them, you're screwed. So, I'm going to mention some of these famous people and what they've gone to jail for. Elliot Spitzer. Remember Elliot Spitzer?
Yep.
Elliot Spitzer was he was the Attorney General of New York State. Mm-hmm. Right? He wasn't a U.S. attorney. He was Attorney General, I think. And Elliot Spitzer, and then he became governor. And the way he got famous to become governor was that he went after some real big name people, some very prominent Wall Street people. And he would go after them for these securities crimes, because, New York, so they had Wall Street there, right? So he'd go after them for these security crimes like insider trading and all this stuff. And usually he didn't actually convict anybody. As far as I know, he may have convicted some people, but I think he mainly got them to sign consent decrees and pay huge fines in order to get out from under the prosecution. So we don't really even know if they were guilty. Because to tell you the truth,
they probably just paid the fine.
If they came after me and they said, Jim, we can criminally prosecute you and you may end up in prison for 10 years, or you can pay us $200,000 and sign a consent decree, I'd probably sign the consent decree. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what they do. Now, so then Spitzer, he becomes U.S. attorney, right? And then somehow, mysteriously, after he becomes governor. And then somehow, mysteriously, suddenly, he's in trouble. And he's in trouble for soliciting high-priced prostitutes. Those are the ones you have to pay $5,000 for a night for. And I guess the reason they're so expensive is because they don't have any venereal diseases. So you have to pay extra for that. So
you have to pay extra for the venereal disease?
No, for them to be...
Oh, I see. Okay.
STD, sexually transmitted disease free,
yeah.
Right? Those are the expensive ones. So, you don't see them out in the street. Elliot Spitzer, by the way, comes from a wealthy family. He's very wealthy. So he was paying $5,000 a night.
It's like buying fruit at Whole Foods versus other places. Yeah. It's more expensive, but there's not any pesticides or
hopefully
herpes.
Yeah. Now, of course, who knows? But it's owned by Amazon now, Whole Foods.
At some point, you're going to get your prostitutes dropped off to your house by drone. That's something exciting to look forward to.
Yeah, that's great. You think that it'll be legal then? It'll only be legal if it's by drone.
Yeah, it's only by drone.
It's legal if it's by drone.
They have a claw, comes down from the sky, picks them up, drops them off.
Well, it's like I've told you before that soliciting a prostitute is illegal in 49 states unless you videotape it.
Right.
Yeah, I've told you that before. If you videotape it, then it's protected by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has held that.
Yeah.
Pornography is protected by the First Amendment. What's the difference between pornography and prostitution? Video camera. Yeah, so it's a tip. Tip for our listeners. News you can
always involved. Use your smartphone. Just say
it's go to a hooker.
Put it in black and white. Make it very
videotape
noir. Do it that way. You're all
okay.
Set.
So anyway, Elliot Spitzer, the way he got into trouble, he was going to these hookers after he had prosecuted. I think he had prosecuted like prostitution rings and stuff. Right now, turns out he's been going to prostitutes, and the way they caught him was because of the bank secrecy laws, that he was making large cash withdrawals from his bank account. And so they investigated him. And I've got to think that the only reason this happened is because he stepped on some toes. He prosecuted the wrong guy. And somebody, these were powerful people. Somebody calls up a buddy at the Treasury Department and says, why don't you look into Elliot Spitzer, see if he... maybe they hired a private investigator first. They got a little dirt on him. They said, make a phone call to somebody at a high level of the Treasury Department. Why don't you take a look at Elliot Spitzer? Bam. They brought him down. The reason they brought him down was because he was violating the bank secrecy laws, which say that if you make large cash deposits, most people know this. If you make a large cash deposit in your bank account, the bank is required by law to report that to the Treasury Department. It's considered a suspicious currency transaction. Okay, just means you sold drugs, right? Well, maybe you didn't sell drugs. Maybe you sold your car, and the guy paid you in cash, and you put it in the bank. Suspicious currency transaction. They report it to the Department of Treasury Department. Well, they also report, they're required by law, the bank's required, to report large cash withdrawals to the Treasury Department. And Spitzer apparently made several of them. That's what brought him down. They investigated him.
So what you're saying is like he would go to different banks and he would have the money come out of different banks, right? Big, long...
I don't know if it was different. It may have all been one bank.
Sure. Oh, well, but it just... He was going to those banks and getting money from that bank, right?
Yeah.
But large deposits.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And what he should have done was kind of keep large withdrawals.
Yeah.
Right? And what he should have been doing was either holding on to the money and just... So the banks were spitzing out the money when he should have been swallowing the money in the bank.
Well, he should have paid the hookers with a check. I don't know.
That's good. That's interesting. I don't know if hookers take checks.
I'll tell you what. I don't make cash deposits in the bank anymore. And I don't make cash withdrawals. Because, I know that as of a few years ago, and this is another abuse of the mega state, of the deep state, that for several years the IRS was stealing money from people who had made a lot of cash deposits in the bank. And there were reports about this in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. George Will wrote a column about it a few years back. It was mostly like small business people. There were grocers or restaurant owners who got a lot of their receipts were in cash, and they didn't want to keep a lot of cash around, so they would go and deposit in the bank. And the bank reported it to the Treasury Department, and the IRS thought that they were trying to evade the laws. In other words, if it's now down to $3,000, if you deposit more than $3,000 cash at one time, that's considered a suspicious currency transaction. Well, these guys would like maybe deposit $800 or $1,200 or $1,500, so they thought that they were trying to evade the regulation by making a lot of small deposits. So they went in and they stole their money. Hundreds of them. They were doing $600 a year of the IRS stealing people's money. And when I say stealing people's money, that's not hyperbole. They were stealing people's money. They just go and take the money out. People who were not under investigation for tax evasion, had not committed any crime, but they made a lot of cash deposits. So the IRS would go and take their money. And then people would go back to the IRS and say, well, why did you take my money? Well, you were trying to evade our regulations on cash deposits. So, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't evade taxes. Give me my money back. No. Why not? Well, we don't give money back. They'd hire lawyers. They still couldn't get the money back.
Right.
Well, anyway, when this became publicized, the IRS announced that they're not doing this anymore. Personally, I ain't taking the risk.
Yeah.
Okay? Okay, so anyway, so that's how they got Spitzer. Denny Hastert. Anybody remember Denny Hastert?
He was a reverend.
Dennis Hastert.
Was it Reverend Denny Hastert?
No.
No, am I wrong? Okay.
No, that's a different guy. You're thinking of Reverend Al Sharpton.
No. I don't remember this guy then. Tell us
Louis
about
Farrakhan? No, Denny Hastert was the Speaker of the House.
Right. Okay.
After Gingrich, no, I think maybe he was before or after Tom DeLay. But anyway, he became Speaker of the House in the early 2000s, right? Republican Speaker of the House. So after he left the House, they discovered that Denny Hastert was making huge cash withdrawals from his bank account. Over a period of a few years, he withdrew $3 million. So they investigated. And do you know what they found? You know what he was doing with the money? He was paying off a blackmailer.
Oh.
Yeah, he was being blackmailed because like 30 years earlier, he had been a high school wrestling coach, and he had sexually abused some of the boys on the wrestling team. So he was being blackmailed. He was paying out huge amounts of cash. Now, he was prosecuted, right? Now, most people think, oh, Denny Hastert was prosecuted for pedophilia because he was abusing these boys. No, he wasn't prosecuted for pedophilia. This is what he was prosecuted for. I'm reading this from source I got it from. In 2015, Hastert was indicted on federal charges of, listen to this, federal charges of structuring bank withdrawals. Structuring bank withdrawals to evade bank reporting requirements and making false statements to federal investigators, of course.
Right.
Of course.
Yes.
By the way, note to self, note to everybody, if you're ever under investigation by any law enforcement agency, don't talk to them. Don't talk to them. No matter how innocent you are, don't talk to them.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, maybe you've done absolutely nothing wrong, but if they think that you lied to them about something, or if somebody else says something different from what you said, this is what we learned from prominent people in the news who've gotten screwed over because they were accused of lying to law enforcement. You just said to them, I said, look, I'd love to talk to you, I'd love to cooperate with you, but I'm going to call my lawyer, and then we'll get back to you. Let the lawyer talk to them. The lawyer can lie to them as much as he wants.
Right.
Okay? Anyway, so they got Hastert not for pedophilia, not for sexually abusing these children. The statute of limitations had run on that. They got him for taking his own money out of the bank. He went to prison for taking his own money out of the bank. The guy who was blackmailing him, they didn't do anything to him. That was okay.
Huh.
Yeah. Now, Paul Manafort, everybody knows Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager. Paul Manafort, what did he go to prison for? Failing to register as a foreign agent. And, of course, tax evasion. Now, see, to me, tax evasion, I've written a book about tax evasion called The Tax Man Cometh by Jim Greenfield.
Second funniest book I've read.
Second funniest book ever written. And that's being modest. And as it says in The Tax Man Cometh, tax evasion is an odd felony. It's the only crime where you go to prison not for taking other people's money, but for trying to keep other people from taking your money. So I don't really believe that tax evasion should be a crime. In fact, the Constitution, the 16th Amendment, the Constitution creates the income tax. But it doesn't say anything about putting people in jail. It says that the government shall collect taxes from income from whatever source derived. It doesn't say anything about putting people in jail. You say, well, how would they collect the tax otherwise? Well, other people collect debts without putting people in jail.
True.
If you owe me money and you don't pay, I sue you, I take you to court, I get a judgment, you don't pay it, I can tax your house or your car or garnish your wages or tax your bank account. I can't put you in jail. We abolished debtor's prison, more than 200 years ago, unless you're the IRS. They're the only ones who have debtor's prison. You owe money to the IRS, you can go to prison for it. You owe money to me, Jim Greenfield, no, sorry, I can't put you in prison. Why is that? It doesn't authorize in the Constitution another power that the federal government has usurped. Okay. But so Paul Manafort is in prison for tax evasion and for failing to register as a foreign agent. Turpitude, that was the word. Moral turpitude.
Turpitude. All right.
Yeah. We're going to have to fill that in back in the beginning of this. So, what do you think? I mean, people listen, you think, wow, that dirty, no good SOB didn't register as a foreign agent.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't know what it means either. No, I do know what it means. It means if you're lobbying for a foreign government, you're supposed to register with some federal department, right?
Oh.
Now,
okay.
There's like 27,000 people who fail to register as foreign agents who work in Washington. Paul Manafort's the only one who's ever gone to prison for it. you can reach your own conclusion as to why they picked on him. I'm exaggerating it.
Right.
You know, he may not be the only one, but it's very rare. Usually if they find out that somebody didn't register, they say you need to register and you got to pay a fine, maybe.
Right.
But you don't go to jail.
Yeah.
But
it's like driving without a license.
Okay, so then you got Michael Cohen, Martha Stewart. I'm just mentioning famous people who have been prosecuted by the federal government on dubious grounds. And I think we're going to take a quick break and then come back to this.
Okay, my suggestion is we might want to wrap this one up soon.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, well, it's
we
not a
don't
quick
come
break.
back.
We're gonna.
Yeah, so it'll be a new segment. It'll be another segment, but I'm going to continue the topic, more or less. You don't want me to continue the topic? You're looking at me like
we're getting a little long in the tooth on this one. No,
Yeah.
just a little long on the episode. If you want to split, it.
this is here we are. We're making this part of the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
This conversation
Right
between
now,
the producer
we don't have to. We don't have to keep
and
it.
the talent. I'm the talent.
Yeah.
What?
We'll call it that. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, I'm just saying, like, it's a long episode. If you want to split it into two parts, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. This is Jim Greenfield with Half My Brain Not. No, you know what? I gotta back up on this. This is how I do this. Okay. This is Rush Limbaugh with Half My Brain Tied Behind My Back just to keep it fair. Actually, it's Jim Greenfield with Half My Brain Not Tied behind my back to keep it fair. I don't care if it's fair.
You're welcome for listening to another brilliant installment of The Decline and Fall of America starring Jim Greenfield, formerly known as The Jim Greenfield Show. If you have a topic you would like Jim to talk about, or if you think Jim is brilliant and want to cheer him on, or you think Jim is an idiot that doesn't know what he's talking about, send an email to jimgreenfieldshowpodcast@gmail.com, follow the show on Facebook at Decline and Fall of America, or on Twitter at JGS Podcast, or you can call and leave a message for Jim at 503-512-0811, and your message will likely get played on the show. And now, our beautiful outro music, The Ode to Jim.
14 years on the radio, Jim Greenfield served humanity. His bosses fired him 7 times. They said he's no Sean Hannity. Greenfield tried to stay out of trouble and be discreet as best he could. He claims the reason he got canned behind the mic, he's just too good. Jim's enemies tried to silence him in panic and hysterica, 'cause Jim Greenfield blames them for the decline and fall of